Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from the past 2 weeks, because I actually was busy last weekend and wasn't able to do this. Darcy and Stacy video comments. Ninon says, why do both of these women's partners look like their soul has been stolen? They both look like they've been beaten down and exhausted. Yeah, it is interesting to see the similarities between the demeanors of both Florian and Georgie. Who knows? It could just be coincidence, but it is interesting to think about the possibility that for someone to fit compatibility-wise with them, particularly Darcy, you might have to be a little subdued. Imagine like a Jesse, a more outward person. I mean, he had issues, but just imagine Darcy with someone that was out there and more reactive like Darcy, how it might actually be a volatile combination. Hard to know, but just the idea that Ninon is pushing it. Lulu says, have we seen Darcy take ownership or responsibility for anything? I mean that as a genuine food for thought question, not as an accusation. Well, Lulu, I appreciate that last sentence there. We don't want to be judgmental towards other people. You know, it's hard for any of us to take responsibility or ownership. And it looks like, at least on the show, it's hard for Darcy as well. And we've seen a lot of footage of Darcy. So the speculation that I have is that she, what we see on the show can be generalized to her personality. We can't know that for sure, but she, on the show, vacillates between two positions. One is this, when things are going okay, she doesn't really need to resort to these two bifurcated spaces. But when things are bad and there's conflict in the relationship and she's feeling attachment threat, she will vacillate between a self-working model of all good or all bad. So the all good is, I'm worth it, women empowerment, I deserve better. You know, you hear her say that, but you see the pain. But the conscious sort of push is this mode of, I deserve better and I don't need this crap and it's about me and my daughters and my business and, you know, and I'm all good is kind of the way to put it. It's easier to see the all bad version that she falls into, where she'll say things like, here I am again, no one's gonna love me. Is this how my life is always going to be? This is how my life has always been. We've seen her in the depths of that kind of self is all bad position. The problem there's many problems with that, but one of the side effects of that lack of differentiation and lack of development regarding your ability to see the gray in others and self is that when you're criticized, you either are all good and therefore the criticism is wrong, or this indicates you're all bad and you fall through the floor and you can't really respond in a mature way to criticism from other people. So that's what we're seeing. Who knows if that's generalizable to a personality though. Tara says, by the way, her friend, the friend that mentioned the things that Georgie said, her friend waited about 4 months to tell her about that rumor. It's interesting. I didn't know that. 4 months. Yeah. Amy says, Dr. Honda, I agree with you. I don't see any evidence to support that Georgie is doing any of these things that Darcy and Stacy are accusing him of. This is so confusing and frustrating to watch. Well, thank you, Amy, for validating me. I'm watching this show. I'm just like, what's happening right now? So I'm glad other people are seeing the same thing I am. Hoopla says, quote, I'm a strong, empowered woman, like Darcy will say. I need to honor myself as a woman. While these are great things to say and hear, it almost lacks meaning when she says it because she says it so often and it doesn't really apply. I wonder if she says these things to try to soothe her inner child who is feeling hurt and abandoned. Yeah, that's interesting. I can absolutely see that as a viable conceptualization, that it's a mode that she goes into to pump herself up. Like when your friend has been dumped, you're like, hey, you deserve better, you can do it. So it's this voice that she manifests to speak to this hurt child inside of herself, but of course it doesn't really work in the end, or it doesn't seem to work. Jasmine says, Dr. Honda Uncensored, That would be a great channel where he says whatever he thinks, even if it's not him being professional. I would listen to that. So a channel or videos where I say whatever I want to. I mean, I don't know. I feel like these videos are pretty close to what I want to say. I mean, I'm not being completely free. You know, if me and the podwife are watching a show, I'm guessing the podwife hears other sorts of things that I would say. But honestly, like the kinds of things that I say in the videos, I don't want to bother people. Like, you know, me and the podwife, sometimes we'll watch these shows after I react to it, or we'll watch other shows that I'm not reacting to, you know, reality TV shows. And I wouldn't want to bother the podwife with me saying, well, actually, so in some ways, you know, these videos are I'm free to say the things that I really want to say when I'm watching these shows, and I don't want to bother people around me with. On the other hand, yeah, I mean, I'm a human being, so I probably have some deplorable things that I think and maybe even say away from the camera. And if I publish that, I think no one would like me anymore. But it's a funny thing to think about. And it's also funny to think like, well, maybe one day, I think about this sometimes actually, because there is a certain amount of censoring and editing that I do to myself, primarily because of my clients. From the beginning of this podcast over 13 years ago, one of the primary ethical and editing concerns that I've had from the beginning is to make sure that everything that I say and do in these publications, that it won't harm my clients or my treatment of my clients. And so there are certain things that I don't talk about by policy, and there are certain things that I will edit out later. I will record audio or video podcasts, and then later on just, that needs to go. Or just when in doubt, I'll take stuff out. And that's why I like having co-hosts, because they're more free to be themselves and more self-disclosing than I'm going to be. But anyway, for the last number of years, I've had this, because it is a lot of pressure to edit yourself, and I've had this sort of plan, I guess, a sort of foggy plan of maybe one day, 20 years from now, where I, close my practice completely and I just say, F it. I'm just going to say whatever I want to say. But then I wonder, would that just ruin the whole thing? Who knows? That's probably mostly just a emotional reaction of mine, because it is a bit of a labor to make sure that I don't say anything that would harm other people. On the other hand, it's like I probably should always try to not say things that would harm other people, right? And honestly, since becoming a therapist, I've tried to not only not say things, but but also not think things. I teach this to my trainees as well, that it's one thing to edit yourself and to clamp down on things that you think, but what if you just change the way that you think, and thus you don't have any impulses that would be deplorable or that would be harmful, that would be racist or sexist or judgmental of other people? And over the years, I feel like I've achieved that. That's why when I started watching these reality TV shows and I started reacting, and people started commenting like, this is really weird content. I like it, but it's really weird content because he's not being judgmental of these people. And I didn't realize, and then I would, over the months, realize that when most people watch and comment about these reality TV shows, it's a lot of judgment. A lot of judgmental things are being said, a lot of criticism, a lot of just hateful things being said about these individuals. And I realized it was like I had been in this cave of non-judgment as a clinician and as a professor for 25 years. And then I emerged into the outside world and wondered, like, why is everyone reacting to me so strangely? It's because the norm is to criticize and to judge and to hate. And it's so I don't have to clamp down on judgment and hate and criticism. I've changed the way that I see humans and myself. And so, Dr. Honda Uncensored, you might already be watching it. I don't know. Maybe the pod wife would disagree on that one. Mike and Natalie. So, we've seen maybe the end of them on this show. Bao says, none of us know if Mike's mom called Natalie a hooker, but knowing Mike's mom thinks Natalie only married Mike to use him to get a green card, it's not a stretch that she would also call Natalie a hooker. Yeah, when that first happened midway through the season, if I was to make a bet, I would have said that Natalie misunderstood what she said, because it just seemed like why would Trish in that context just call her hooker? But after seeing the whole season and the tell-all, I could see Trish calling her a hooker. Absolutely. Who knows if it happened? But I mean, the things that mom said, or the rigidity, and the things she even said to her son, were shocking. AR says, Julia surprisingly has a lot of sexist opinions and views. I've seen her saying these sorts of comments about other women. Right, so Julia was saying to Natalie, go home, that kind of stuff, and it's like, whoa. Yeah, that was one of the biggest turnarounds, and that happened last season too. Julia seemed like such a nice person, easygoing, enthusiastic, a very likable character. And then the tell-all happens, and yeah, these things come out of her face that are like, whoa. Sophia says, really hurtful for Julia to accuse Natalie of using Mike for a green card, especially since Julia has experienced the same prejudice from Brandon's friend. Yeah, absolutely. If anyone understands how Natalie feels, it should be Julia, right? Nina says, it's interesting that Mike is playing the poor me nice guy role right now. It frustrates me that he can't see the part he played in the downfall of their relationship. Natalie has flaws as well, but she has at least acknowledged them somewhat. Their communication styles or lack thereof is such a struggle to watch sometimes. Yes, agreed, Nina. And I think I hypothesized this in a number of videos, that for Mike, especially towards the end of the season, that Mike struggles with shame and guilt and is in the process right now of wondering, was I to blame? I mean, certainly he knows that Natalie thinks he's to blame for the end of the relationship. And so he is defending himself against that by shutting himself off to any ideas of ownership of the problems in the relationship, which is really common when people are breaking up. Good old Lean Donut says, wow, as soon as Julia got her papers, she sure was quick to adopt Angela's mentality about who can live here and who can't. Angela's mentality. Good old Stella Annie says, I felt so bad for Natalie watching this and seeing all of them ganging up on her, and the xenophobia and the weird possessive attitudes about America that they all seem to have. It's so damn exclusive. If it's so damn exclusive to live in the States, then why are ignorant people like Angela allowed to stay? Yeah, I'll tell you, this attitude that some Americans have of just like, I don't want to get this. Is not getting. Jesus says, the amount of hate comments on Natalie's Insta page, my goodness, I hope that girl is surrounded by people who care about her. Are people hating on Natalie on our Instagram page? That's pretty awful. I mean, of the couples that we saw on 90 Day Fiancé, Mike and Natalie were just a regular couple. I mean, if you just look at their behavior, I mean, there were certain things that were said, cultural differences, but on the whole, I think what we watched was two people falling in love, really being desperate. I mean, it seemed like in the beginning they were just like, oh, this feels so good that we finally have someone that, I'm in love with, that loves me, and then we just watched a long, protracted breakup with a lot of messiness, including a marriage that happened during a pandemic. And I don't think there's any reason to hate Natalie. I mean, you can certainly criticize her for certain things that she would say, and Mike, but I wish that people wouldn't hate people. The thing that I always say when I hear about this, imagine your life being on a reality TV show and edited in such a way that makes it sensational. So, I don't think any of us can point a finger at these people and say, what's wrong with them? Sierra says, it hurts me that no one mentioned any of Mike's shortcomings during the tell-all. I almost had to stop watching because I was getting so upset. The relationship falling apart is absolutely not Natalie's fault. A relationship takes two people, and Mike's victim mentality did nothing to help. I could never be with a man like Mike. He barely says anything, and when he does, it's only to place blame on others. He needs to look inward and realize he's absolutely not a victim here. Both of them are equally to blame for the downfall of the relationship. Yeah, absolutely. And I've been commenting on this from the beginning, that when they would hurt each other, they would put up walls, particularly Mike. I remember that very seminal, or I don't know, very important scene where she threw the ring back at him, or it might have been just before that. And the way that he responded was so blank. It seemed clear that he still wanted to be with her and was still like, yeah, I still want to work this out. But there was nothing in the way he was. There was nothing he was saying about that. He never said, "You hurt my feelings when you did that." It was always like, "Yeah, there you go." When deep down, I could sense that he really wanted to work out. So I just remember from the beginning thinking, "Oh no, they're both triggering each other." And if they just had a little bit of help, that one couples therapy session, if they had done that 20 or 30 more times, I definitely think it could have helped. I think it really is a tragedy. It's interesting. Of all the couples that we've seen, I'm trying to think if there's another couple that I thought had more potential lost in their breakup. I'm trying to think if there's another. Let me know in the comments below if you can think of another couple that I've watched that definitely could have worked but didn't work because of just massive misunderstandings that could have probably easily been helped in therapy. Davinia says, unfortunately, the go-home narrative is not exclusive to America. I'm from Spain and moved to Ireland many years ago. I've been told more than a few times to go home, often by people who don't contribute anything to the country, even though I got married, had 2 kids, and work full-time. Yeah, racism and xenophobia is definitely not an American invention. Paulina says, the translation of what Natalie says is a bit off. The subtitles say, we had a wonderful relationship, but she's saying we had sincere feelings for each other. That's interesting, Paulina, that 1, they would mess up the subtitles, which of course makes sense, and 2, that they might purposely mess up the subtitles. So according to Paulina, Natalie was saying, we had sincere feelings for each other, but the subtitle said, we had a wonderful relationship. Those are 2 completely different things, right? It's interesting. Tiffany and Ronald. Arun says, Ronald sounds like he just finished one of Ash's gender and relationship courses. Ronald sounds like he just finished one of Ash's courses. Well, no. I mean, Ash wasn't advocating for abuse and control and intimate partner violence and intimidation, but the underlying ideas that are prevalent in Ash's course and in the discourse of societies around the world, that men are this way, women are this way, and often perpetuating the patriarchy, definitely are part of the abusive cycle and are contributing to it. So, yeah. Ty says, I interpreted Tiffany's facial expression after saying, I love him, as her. So, right, I was wondering what was, because Tiffany says, yeah, I love him, but then she had some kind of weird face and I was having a hard time understanding. I interpreted Tiffany's facial expression as her being a bit frustrated with herself that she does love him. Ah, that makes sense. She's like, well, I love him. Like she was saying, I'm surprised at myself that I still love him. Cassidy says, they mirror each other. They both are trying to be domineering. He might be outright saying he wants her to be subservient, but I think that's how she treats him as well. Yeah, they definitely have a power and control problem, and it's hard to know who's more to blame. I would say that Ronald is definitely saying things that are much more in line with intimate partner violence and high control and sexist and misogynistic and patriarchal. So it's really easy to look at the things he's saying and the things that he's doing as being a problem. With Tiffany, her as well, but I think it's more in the category of over-functioning, which obviously could grow into an intimate partner violence or a high control or a contemptuous way of approaching your partner. And I think for Tiffany, and this is very common in relationships in which one person has an addiction, is that Tiffany is fighting for over-functioning. And they might have actually worked well in the beginning of the relationship when it was like this, where Ronald was the broken addict and she was the savior who kind of told him what to do. And Ronald might have even wanted that in the beginning. Who knows? And she's fighting for that, and she's, for whatever reason from her history, she's comfortable with that role of being the overfunctioner, of looking down on someone, and often the codependent. Now, I've talked about this before. The word codependency, this is codependency. It's one form of codependency, is where you have the dependent person, the person who's addicted to spending and to gambling. Was it gambling he had a problem with? And then, so he's dependent on gambling. And then you have the codependent who fits with the dependency. And the way that you perpetuate the dependency is you have someone that's putting you down all the time, making you feel shameful. It makes you feel stressed out. It makes you run to gambling. And the cycle just goes round and around. That's codependency. The way the internet and the way society and the way a lot of therapists use the word codependency, they're actually talking about dependency. Anyway, Kalani Asuelu. Monica says, 2 thumbs up to Asuelu's personal growth through the years. If only the mom and sister could evolve and implement more compassion and understanding into their lives. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the huge success stories that we've seen on this show is Asuelu developing and growing, for sure. I mean, remember in the beginning, he was always throwing Kalani under the bus. He really did act like a child, and especially even this season, we saw a lot of growth in him, seemingly. It's hard to know, but definitely seems to be going in the right direction. And we need to be, pointing that out. Formica, good old Formica Forever says, Tammy's responses reminds me of a child's response. I'm rubber, you're glue. Whatever you say bounces off me and sticks to you. I know you are, but what am I? Right. Yeah, there are a number of comments. I was having, maybe I was having one of those authentic moments where I just laugh at Tammy's comebacks in a way that isn't very kind. And I was wondering if I was being a jerk face by laughing. And there were people that were saying that they were supporting me in that way. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, there's not a lot of love for Tammy amongst the viewership, but she's a person too and deserves, our care. But I think we can all point out behavior that we think is very unfair. Andrea says, I think Asuelu has realized that Kalani's family has been more supportive and loving to him than his own family. I think Asuelu has realized that Kalani's family has been more supportive and loving to him than his own family. Maybe that's part of the reason we have seen such a big change in him. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is happening as well, because he's been living with, hasn't he been living? Or he was anyway with his in-law parents, and seeing a completely different way of life, probably a completely different family life. And maybe that has helped him to grow up for sure. And it's a wonderful thing to see. I mean, just think of if this works out, the benefits to them and their kids. So, I think we should celebrate that and really rally behind Asuelu. And we've seen over the past season, and I think I reacted to it, where Kalani would kind of start to overfunction again. And I was worried that dynamic would start to happen, because as she starts to overfunction and put him down and have a contemptuous sort of mother, the faces that mothers often have towards their adolescent boys. Anyway, so let's hope. They did go to therapy, though, did they not? Anyway, Jessica says, I totally agree with you on the parent thing. So I was talking about how the Asuelus of the world will often email me or come to my office and talk about how much guilt they feel about cutting off their own parent. And, I never know what to say regarding advice. I don't tell people they should cut off from their parent or not. But we do have this thing in our society, and who is saying, like, she's your mom, you can't cut her off. Anyway, was that Natalie? Anyway, the point is that, yes, we should respect our elders in general, within reason. We should respect our parents within reason. We should remember how much sacrifice our parents went through for us and honor that. But there's definitely a line that if a parent crosses, then, if you decide to cut yourself off from your parent, then in my book, morally speaking, you're completely okay. And the thing that you'll see in these kids who cut themselves off from their parents in situations like that is they're suffering either way. They're suffering if they stay connected to their parent, and they're suffering if they leave. So it's not like this, ha, 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 I'm going to reject my parent and, it's going to be this wonderful life. They're suffering on both sides, and it's the parent's fault is the thing. So anyway, I totally agree with you on the parent thing. I've recently had to put space with my mom. I've decided not to invite her to my wedding. I'm very nervous about what other family members and friends will say. It's very embarrassing and hard to explain that your parent isn't a good person. I get a lot of, yeah, but she's your mom, which I don't understand. Yeah, I already went over that, but the fact, it's interesting. I get a lot of emails from things that aren't supported by society. Back in the day, it would be LGBTQIA things. It still is to some extent, and other emails I'll get is like, I don't know if my therapist is a good therapist. Because there's this idea in society that, like, you're supposed to trust your therapist, but there are bad therapists out there. I've been to some bad therapists, so but you're not allowed to talk about that because it indicates that you're resisting therapy or something. And another one of the things that I would get a lot of people is like, is it okay that I don't invite my mom to my wedding, even though she's ruined my life and she absolutely will ruin my wedding? And it's like, well, I can't give you permission to do that, but I'll say that it sounds reasonable to me, given what you're saying. It sounds reasonable that you could have rejected her a long time ago. Yeah. Angela and Michael. Jessica says, I really believe Angela deep down within must know that she is in the wrong by not being honest about what she wants and essentially misleading Michael and his family, and instead of owning up to it. She creates these arguments in ridiculous situations, which leads to that being the narrative instead of the real issue. Her behavior is really problematic and difficult to keep watching. Yeah, Jessica, I can't believe I didn't think of that. I don't remember thinking that at the time, that Angela would do the big blow up and all the things that she did as a way of distracting from the fact that she knows that she tricked, at least kind of, Michael into marrying her on the idea that she was going to have children, and now she doesn't want to have kids anymore. And so she, just explodes as a way of trying to distract from that. The analogy is your partner is cheating on you and you go to them and you say, I found this text on your phone and I think you're cheating on me, and your spouse is cheating on you, and they just explode with anger, like, I can't believe you would accuse me of that. How dare you? You're paranoid. And it's a way of trying to get away with something. Anybody says the way Angela talks to Michael is most likely exactly how she talks to her children. That's why Skyla is so relaxed and calm in this environment. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, because the clips that they show with her and her daughter, her and her mom who passed away, her and her grandkids, we don't see that kind of behavior, but we could imagine it happening, right? Which would be a bigger yikes than Michael, honestly. CB says, I don't see enough people calling Angela exactly what she is. She is an abuser. Michael is in an abusive relationship. If Angela was a man, we would not find this behavior entertaining. Yeah, I've been calling it abusive since, I think, the cake incident. It is abusive. So what are the markers of it being abusive? Well, she is intimidating for sure. She's been physical with him a number of times on camera, so we can imagine other times off camera, who knows. She uses breaking up with him often. She also is in a relationship with someone. It's not symmetrical in that he doesn't have as much power, I think. I think the way that the relationship is set up, and they've explicitly talked about this, how he wants to come to the United States, and so she uses that as a way of controlling him. You know, she'll withdraw that and say, like, if you don't do exactly what I want you to do, if you ever criticize me, or if you ever talk back to me, if you ever not listen to me as I yell at you and push you around physically, then I will take away this green card. You know, it definitely has those abusive markers. We would have to talk to Michael to really understand whether or not it truly is quote unquote abusive. We would have to ask and have him be able to answer honestly to us. Because there's a chance that for Michael, he doesn't receive it that, you know, there's a difference between being abusive and being abused. Someone can be abusive to you, but it doesn't really affect you. And so you don't feel abused by it. You're just like, well, that's unfortunate that person's being that way. So we'd have to really know from Michael what's happening. And they almost never interview Michael. And I don't imagine Michael being very forthcoming about that kind of stuff. Georgie Jake said, this is about the breastfeeding discussion. Having been to Nigeria, I don't actually find it odd. They tend to nurture their kids longer than we do in the West. Breastfeeding is so natural there. I'm guessing to his mom, it would be akin to cuddling her child. Right, agreed. Right, because in the video, the way everyone was reacting was like, ew, that's so gross. And then they were breastfeeding until 9. And I was saying that it could be a problem. You know, it's not like it's automatically not a problem, but just that one detail that because what happens a lot of times when you're breastfeeding, you know, past the age of 3 or 4, that it's occasional. It's not like it is when the baby was 3 months old and there's a lot of feeding, a lot of cuddling, a lot of, you know, right there. When you're 4 years old or maybe 9 years old and you're breastfeeding, it might even be just like once a week or, you know, maybe once a day for, you know, 3 minutes or something. And it would be akin to cuddling your child. It's not done for sustenance. It's done as a cuddling closeness, a child coming for some comfort, you know. And anyone who has a 9-year-old, hopefully you'll see them reach out to you in ways that seem like they're younger. Maybe not breastfeeding, but it might be something like they want to sit in your lap, or they want to be held, or they want you to sleep next to them, or they want to fall asleep in your arms, or something like that, which wouldn't be considered mainstream 9-year-old behavior. But would be more akin to that of a 4-year-old or a 2-year-old. And somehow we're okay with that. But because it involves the breasts, suddenly it's this taboo thing, because in the Western or American society, we're completely sex negative and paranoid about all sorts of things that we don't need to be paranoid about. And other cultures just don't have that paranoia, and they're freer to just be who they are and not like completely freak out about everything involving particularly the woman's body. Egel says, I watched this documentary on breastfeeding in Mongolian culture, and culturally it's normal to breastfeed kids to the age of 10 and beyond. It's normal to give breast milk to older relatives to boost their immune system. It's unusual for our culture, but I think it's pretty offensive to apply our way of living to everyone and react the way these cast members are reacting. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's expected, right? I mean, we can't expect the cast members, or really anyone in Western society, to educate themselves on this topic, because how would they? But yeah, the word offensive, Egel, is apt to me, where you just, especially because Michael is in a different culture, and the first thought you should have is, but even in your own town, if there was someone that was doing something different than what you would do, the first thought you should have, I would hope, and this is what I try to do, I don't always do it obviously, is I wonder if my initial reaction, where I feel disgust or some kind of negative reaction, I wonder if that's coming from some kind of cultural brainwashing that I've been through. I wonder if I've been brainwashed to interpret that behavior as X, Y, or Z, when in reality, it's not. This is a very, very advanced way of thinking, and I'm guessing y'all have done it before, and the more we can do this, the better our world would be. And being a therapist, I was talking earlier about, going into a cave. Another part of the element of the cave, I was in there with a lot of other people, a lot of other professors and therapists, and academics, thinking about how we think. And one of the things that you emerge from the cave with is this notion of like, every thought I have might be coming from a cultural brainwashed place. Literally everything I look at, the way I look at love and sex and money and nature and technology and clothes and the body and everything that I look at is probably 90% of the ideas and the reactivity I have to it is from my culture. For example, when I, being from Seattle, smell body odor, I cannot stand it. It completely disgusts me. Why? Because Seattle isn't a very warm place, and so there's not a lot of sweating. But also, I grew up in an American society in which the idea of body odor was so abhorrent because marketers told us, because they wanted us to buy more things that ultimately aren't great for our bodies, to wear a lot of deodorant and blah, 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 perfume. And so when I smell body odor, I can't convince myself that it smells good because those neurons have already been locked in place that that's a disgusting thing. The vast majority of the world is not as disgusted by body odor as I am because they haven't been brainwashed by marketers and by culture to buy things to eliminate a normal bodily thing. And so that is cultural as well. Just my disgust reaction to a smell is a result of me being indoctrinated into a culture. So there are all sorts of ideas, including my idea of breastfeeding, which now, as I said in the video, might there have been a problem between Michael and his mother that was exemplified by the late weaning of Michael? Yes, but we have no evidence of that, so we can't know that. It would be, something to look at, but... And so when people just go, ew, I do think that's offensive, particularly around something that doesn't harm anyone. If Michael said something like, we take, thousands of gallons of pollutants and dump it into the ocean, and it's a part of our culture, then even if it is a part of their culture, feel free to go, what? Breastfeeding someone occasionally when they're 9 years old, it doesn't harm you, and it doesn't necessarily harm the child. So we should have that ability to differentiate. I was making this argument in the 90s and the 80s when I was coming up into adulthood and becoming a therapist, when the vast majority of Americans were against gay marriage. I would be talking to these people. I'd be like, how does it hurt you? Like, why do you care? It doesn't harm you. It doesn't harm anyone. Why are you so against something that just feels wrong to you but doesn't harm anyone? It's this kind of thing. We should be able to differentiate between, like, this feels wrong. Wait, does it harm anyone really? Do I know it harms anyone? If I can say, if I can't know, if I don't know if it harms anyone, then I need to check my own reaction. Be like, well, I'm having a cultural brainwashed indoctrination moment right now. I have no evidence that behavior harms anyone. It feels weird to me, but I need to check that. Again, if it was harmful, like Michael says, we're dumping thousands of gallons of pollution into the ocean, you're like, this feels bad to me. Wait, is this a cultural thing? Does it harm anyone? Yes, it does harm in the planet and animals. So I'm free to have my just some kind of evaluation of that kind of thing. And clearly no one on the cast had that reaction, which I don't blame them. Of the things on the show that I've watched, again, I can't expect everyone to go into a cave for 25 years of therapy and academic exploration of why we know what we know and how we know, and to emerge with some automatic practice of evaluating one's cultural brainwashing. Anyway, Elizabeth and one, actually, just on this topic, one of my mentors, Phil Cushman, when I was getting my doctorate, this was all his discussion. He would, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about his lectures. I took many classes, and he was a very good friend of mine as well. Because when I was getting my doctorate, I was getting my doctorate from the university I was working at, because I was already a professor there, and then I was getting my doctorate as I was a professor. So Phil was both a friend and a colleague and a coworker and my mentor and professor. Anyways, it's kind of a weird thing. But he would lecture I would listen to him lecture for 3 hours at a time, and he'd just be working off of these notes. And he didn't use PowerPoints or anything, and he would just take me on this mind journey of. And I remember, and I think I told him this, that after his lectures, I felt untethered in a scary yet euphoric way from the world, because he would expose all of these indoctrinations and these cultural brainwashing elements. He called it, the field that he adhered to was called hermeneutics, and there's different ideas of even what that means. But from where he was coming from, it was this constant evaluation of what are my reactions and how did I get there? And I can never even know if my reaction is moral or makes sense or right-headed or wrong-headed. In fact, sometimes you'll hear me say the word wrong-headed, and I completely get it from Phil Cushman. He would say that a lot, like, that's wrong-headed. And I was like, oh, I kind of like that. I kind of like that term. I'm sure I'm using it wrong. But anyway, in terms of his eyes, he is a brilliant man and author. And it took a lot of time for me to wrestle and write and think and read and talk to him. And part of the big reason why he wanted us to go through this as students was to help us be better therapists and also better academics, researchers, but better therapists, because as we approach clients, how can we know as a therapist our reaction to our clients if it's based on anything that's good or not? Because like one of the things that can happen in therapy is that therapists can unwittingly give in to the patriarchy or unknowingly give in to capitalism ideas and promote those ideas in the therapy. Like you have a 16-year-old who is flunking out of school and smoking pot. Well, the capitalism notions that we've been indoctrinated into says we have to make this person into a productive laborer so that the capitalists can exploit them. That's not the conscious thought, but that's the principle. And so I have to get the kid to go to school. I have to get the kid to stop smoking pot. I need the kid to fit into the white middle class model of, consumerism. And if they're not going to go to school and they're not going to earn a lot of money and they're just going to sit home and watch Ren and Stimpy and smoke pot, then they're not participating. And so I have to. Whereas if we get rid of all those notions, then we look at the 60-year-old who is smoking pot all the time, and what should I care as a therapist if he smokes pot and drops out of school? What's the difference? Like, what's it to me? Is it really harming the world? Is he harming himself? You could easily say that if the typical path for an American is so harmful to the environment and to the world, that anyone who is not doing that is doing the world a favor. So, and that's just one idea I just came up with off the top of my head, but there's all sorts of really weird mind screws that you can go on, and to be a truly good citizen and to be a truly good therapist and be a truly good person requires you to do this kind of evaluation, because you can't trust even your notion of what is good and bad. You can't trust even your notions of what is good in life, because you have been indoctrinated by a political system, by an economic system, by a societal system, a cultural system, a family system. And you have to have a practice. That's the key, is this hermeneutic practice of evaluation of how you are thinking and how you're influenced, because then you are free to actually make a choice that is based on logic and what is good in life. Anyway, does that make any sense to anyone? Elizabeth and Andre, good old political troll, says Andre is a meathead with a caveman idea about gender roles. But that being said, when you look at Libby's brother and sisters, he's probably the classiest individual in the family. Even Chuck has been arrested for not paying his child support. Chuck was arrested for not paying his child support? Huh. Interesting. Ann Jelly says, I wonder if maybe the siblings have never worked outside the family circle. Maybe that's why they believe every deal or loan is personal and related to how much the father loves them. That's not how business works out in the outside world. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about how a lot of the kids might have never worked outside the family, and family work and love and, you know, protectiveness around that might be how they grew up. And for Andre to come into it, you know, might feel as though he's becoming like an adopted son or something. And my hypothesis has been from the beginning that the kids have been neglected from attachment and attunement and love, and they interpret Chuck's attention to Andre as a threat to an already depleted system that they have. Sumeta says, manipulation is telling your father-in-law that I'll take your daughter and granddaughter to Moldova because I'll be deported. He had his license. He could have looked for a job somewhere else. Right. So this is an idea that a lot of people have, an idea that I don't often talk about, but I did sometimes, because their whole thing was like he's manipulative, and I was like, I don't see it. But then I was like, well, actually, you could make the argument that if Andre was amping up this idea that he'll get deported if he doesn't get a job as a way of manipulating Chuck into hiring him, then you could see that as a manipulation. It could have just been something that Andre just lays out there. But then you can make the argument, well, certainly you could hit up Chuck for a job, but why weren't you desperately trying to get a job anywhere? Because it seemed clear that he didn't want to start at the bottom. He wanted to start at the top, Andre. So it could have been a manipulation for sure. The siblings never said that, though. They never said... They just said he's manipulating, but never gave any data. It was always like, look at him, he's this psychopathic manipulator. But they never said, because he manipulated you into, you know, saying that he was going to move. So yeah. But the other part of this is, Chuck seemed pretty ready to hire him. And it didn't take much for Chuck to be like, yeah, let's do this. And Chuck seems to not only enjoy working with Andre compared to working with Charlie, but he also has said that Andre is a good worker, that he, you know, so it's a win-win for everyone. And I don't think we need to apply this idea of manipulation to it. Linda says, nowadays, a certain group of people tends to say, I am being canceled when their actions have consequences. Charlie is almost a satire of this new trend. Right. And I said this in the video. It's just, I knew about cancel culture. I knew about the backlash against cancel culture. I knew about people talking, a certain group of people will say, talking about cancel culture a lot. But I didn't know that people would say in that context, I'm being canceled, as a way of trying to accuse a group of people of I don't know what, unfairly rejecting you or something. And Charlie doing this, yeah, is almost a satire of that trend for sure. Charlie's a satire of a lot of things, honestly. Eric says, I wish someone would tell Charlie that they do love him. I don't know if that is something he needs to hear, because there is so much insecurity there. Yeah, absolutely. I think what Charlie is exhibiting is someone that desperately wants someone's love and attention and is, you know, terrified to ask, for sure. Annie says, personally, I think it's the case more often than people realize that alcohol is to blame for the behavior. Absolutely. Jenny in Summit says, patron Rumi actually emailed in from London, and she says, I 100% can relate to Summit's lying, and here is why. Up to the age of 32, I lived with my strict Indian parents. They controlled everything about my life, to the clothes I wore, to having a social life. I'd be met with verbal and sometimes even physical violence. So I learned to lie just so I could live my life. It was the only way I could keep the peace. Tell them what they wanted to hear and also live my life. I think this is what's happening to Summit. Absolutely. It seems very clear from what we've seen from the mom in particular that his whole life, Summit has had to lie in order to live his life. And thank you for sharing your story, Rumi. I'm really sorry you went through that. It sounds awful. Alex says, a lot of cultures don't take kindly to divorce, and they make your life a living hell. It can be worse than the mafia, and your family name can be ruined, and you and your family are targeted. Yeah, that's one of the things about watching this show that I've learned, is that I knew that there was stigma around divorce, but I didn't realize that it was this far. You know, it's one thing to be stigmatized, like, oh, don't date her, she's divorced. She has kids from a previous marriage. I mean, certainly in America, the United States, we have those kinds of notions to some extent still, for sure. So I thought it was just kind of more of that attitude, but this is depicting legal and physical threats to you if you get divorced, which is surprising, but shouldn't be surprising to me. Anyway, Elena says, I am a I think Elena is talking about how Summit lies a lot. I am a pathological liar. A really weird reason that I might lie is to seem more interesting. I'm getting better at admitting that I've lied, but it's very hard not to lie. A few days ago, I lied to my husband about eating something from the fridge, then followed it up with, I'm sorry, I don't know why I just lied. Yes, I did eat it. Right. So I get emails like this sometimes, and I've also treated people like this. Pathological lying in the internet is just, it's seen as this psychopathic thing, and sometimes it is. But for some people, like Samit, they grew up, they're not psychopaths. They do have empathy. They do care about other people. But they had to lie. And so one of the things that you do is that, and I wondered if Ash also had this, is that when you grow up in a survival landscape and you have to lie, and one of the markers of lies is if you hesitate. So did you take the cookie out of the cookie jar? You're like, no, I did not. Whereas if you answer right away, then you get away with the lie much more often. And if you're abused and controlled in these unfair ways, you learn how to lie very quickly, whether it's conscious or not. And then over time, it just becomes this habit. And that's the pathological part of it, is that it doesn't serve the pathological liar to lie. And for Summit, I don't know if he goes that far to actual pathological lying, but we could see how it would become a habit for him. And the habit that I hypothesized is not only the habit of lying about these kind of key things, but also going into denial about it. Because you could see him at the age of like 7, like what Rumi is saying. Maybe he wanted to have a friend that family didn't want him to have. And in order to have the friend, he'd have to lie about it. But then he'd have to come home and act like he didn't have that friend. And so he has this ability to turn off reality, because if he remembers he has the friend, it's harder for him to lie about it. So I wonder if that's what's happening for him. Fazarella says, I wish divorce wasn't such a taboo and stigma in India. A lot of people stay in abusive and violent marriages because they can't get divorced. Children see it and the cycle continues. Yeah. And that was demonstrated actually, because in the United States, we went from a place where divorce was extremely taboo and sometimes illegal to, it being more acceptable, not only in society, but in religion and in laws. And so we've seen, it's hard to know exactly the effects of that, but one of the effects seems to be that women have more power in relationships and are able to leave relationships that they wouldn't, that they're being abused in or they don't want to be in. The other benefit was seemingly that children wouldn't have to be in a household with warring parents. But it's complicated because the best case scenario, according to research, is that the parents stay together and aren't fighting. If they're fighting, it's probably better that they get a divorce, particularly if the kids are being exposed to the fighting. the outcomes aren't as great because kids really do want their caregiver, the caregivers that they entered the world with, whether it's 1 or 5, they want those caregivers to get along and they want them to stay together. And it's a bit of a threat to a child to watch a breakup happen because they wonder, is it going to happen to me? Plus, there's often a lot of stress that kids go through. Anyway, but a worst case scenario from either of those is the parents stay together and are fighting in front of the kids. Then the kids really, really suffer. RRD says, if I move across the world away from my own family and sell my worldly possessions to be with you, and you don't do the bare minimum of 1, actually being single, and 2, getting married after 10 years, there is no excuse. He is not misunderstood. He's a coward and a liar. I just wish Jenny would find therapy and peace so she can meet someone who truly treats her well. Yeah, I can see that sentiment. Mensch says, it's true and fair to blame Summit for how he treated Jenny. But knowing quite a bit about Indian culture, I just can't help to just feel awfully, awfully sorry for him. Yeah, agreed. Devin and Jihoon. Morgan says, unfortunately, I can relate to Jihoon. I've been in a pattern of constant avoidance and procrastination for years now, and it absolutely destroys my self-esteem. Growing up, I've always been told that I was useless. Sometimes I do try, but then I fail and I feel even worse than before, which then drives me to procrastinate even more. Actually, I don't have a lot of time. I'm looking at my clock. There is a lot of emails about people relating to Jihoon and what I was saying about Jihoon. A lot of people with ADHD, a lot of people with these problems of procrastination. Listen to my episodes on avoidant personality disorder, they're for patrons, on dependent personality disorder, and on procrastination. Those episodes are important for a number of reasons. One is it not only if you are someone like that, but also if you have someone like that in your life. Because often the accusation is what perpetuates the problem. Someone will look at someone who procrastinates, says, you're a loser, you procrastinate, what are you doing? You're not applying yourself. Well, that just shames the person even more and causes the person to have even more reason to hate themselves and to avoid as a way of trying to preserve their the shred of self-esteem that they have. So, and Jihoon seems to exhibit that, that self-hatred that he has. And some of you were saying you're in therapy, which is good, and it takes time. And some of you are saying, like, it takes a long time to recover. It does. The kinds of things that people suffer from, like Jihoon, or that exhibit the behaviors that Jihoon does, the avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, chronic procrastination, these things can take 20 years of therapy to unravel because the damage was done 0 to 5. And so it takes a long time. It's not something like, here's some tips on how to get over procrastination. Here's some tips on how to have self-esteem. It does not work that way. If it did, there wouldn't be a thing called therapy. Other people saying that the mom was a jerk face for not letting him cry, for sure, absolutely. I don't have a lot of time. Actually, all my friends are coming over because we're doing a fantasy football league thing, and I think people have already arrived because they're a little early. But anyway, I'll do these next time. Okay. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.